told us a little story about the father-in-law who was convinced that his son thought he was God. Well, apparently they let the children get married, and the father-in-law says to his kid, okay, I want you to start business. I'm going to give you $5,000, go invest in something. Find something that's useful. That's your job. Find something that's useful. So the kid goes out and he comes back with a wagon load of shofars. And this is, of course, way before the Judaica gift world had developed. And his father says, you have thousands of horns. What am I supposed to do with these? He says, well, they're useful. Rosh Hashanah comes up, He says, well, there's only one person needs to blow the shul needs to blow the shofar in each shul. How many shuls are there in our shtetl? 3 shuls. And how many shuls are there in the area? You bought 5,000 shofars. What am I supposed to do with that? He says, when I told you to get something useful, something that every single person needs, idiot. And he says, okay, I'll find somebody to figure out how to offload these shofars. Here's another $5,000, go invest in something that everybody needs. Meantime, he calls over another guy who he knows he's a magician with business and says, listen, my idiot son-in-law just bought 5,000 shofars. Figure out some way to get rid of them. He says, how am I supposed to get rid of 5,000 shofars? Says, I don't know. I'll pay you whatever it takes to, just get rid of them. So, all right. He takes it on commission. He's taking it. He's getting more than just commission. He's getting paid to get rid of these things. So he pulls it off to start thinking about how he's going to do this. In the meantime, the son-in-law goes out and he comes back with a wagon load of toothpicks. And he comes back. He says, everybody needs toothpicks. I got them for a great price. And his father-in-law is absolutely furious. He says, you're an absolute fool. You're an imbecile. He says, what? Everybody needs toothpicks. He says, yeah, but, $5,000 worth of toothpicks, that's not a business deal. What am I supposed to do with $5,000? He pulls over somebody else and says, okay, get rid of these things. And he's still trying to figure out what to do with his son-in-law. He says, go back to study for a little bit longer and I'll try to figure out something that will be more appropriate for you. In the meantime, these two guys that he had hired to get rid of the shofars and the toothpicks, and at some point they bump into each other. And one guy says, oh, you wouldn't believe it. I've had the hardest time to try to get rid of $5,000 worth of shofars. And the other guy says, I have this terrible time trying to get rid of $5,000 worth of toothpicks. Let's swap. So they come back to the father-in-law. One guy presents him with the toothpicks and one guy presents him with the shofars, and he is on the floor. He thinks this is the funniest thing ever. My son-in-law is in the next room. He says, Shver, with all due respect, I don't understand. You were furious at me, but these guys, you're totally fine with. He says, you traded good money for garbage. They traded garbage for garbage. The idea for us is, of course, value is not just something theoretical. Value is something that's obviously very, very, very much on the table. And when we look at our lives, there's an element of value that we oftentimes mistake. And we mistake something that seems useful for something that's not. We mistake something that everybody needs for something that is really not valuable. And that's basically what this chapter is going to deal with. And like I told you, the previous Rebbe introduces this idea and talks about it in generalities. And when the Rebbe took this idea into our generation, he completely transformed American Jewry, because he saw something that's much, much deeper, much greater within. You might even say that he was able to take the worthless shofars and create a Judaic gift company or something like that, something that looks worthless, that looks foolish, and to be able to make cash out of it, so to speak. And that's what we're going to talk about. the idea of taking shtus, which means foolishness, and creating something valuable out of it. So the Rebbe says, and this is an extensive chapter. So
which chapter is this, please?
This is chapter 3.
Okay, of the first grouping, right? From 5710.
Yep, you got it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Problem. In discussing this whole idea that that a person needs to create a mikdash, a Beit HaMikdash. Now, what was the Beit HaMikdash built out of? It was the original Mishkan. Actually, was built out of wood. The Beit HaMikdash itself was built out of stone, but the original Mishkan was made out of wood, and specifically acacia wood, and that's going to be very important for the idea that we're going to bring up here. So, through the above explanation, we can appreciate why the Mishkan, the sanctuary in the wilderness, was built of acacia wood. As we have seen, the primary function of the divine service in the Mishkan and in the Beit HaMikdash was the transformation of darkness into light by means of the sacrificial offerings, and particularly through the incense offerings. And we spoke about, of course, the sacrificial offering comes from the term karban, which is the idea of likarev, to bring close. And we explained that there are two ideas there. One is that a person needs to bring themselves close, and it's completely dependent upon them. And the second idea is that they need to sacrifice their animal soul to God. That was one. And then we mentioned briefly the idea of the incense offering. The incense offering was, of course, a primary element of the sacrifices every single day. And what's very interesting about this, the incense, is that it was made up of 11 ingredients. 11 in Kabbalistic numbers is known as the not number. God has 10 energies, not 11. And the reason why is because 11 has a connection with negativity. Not only that, but the 11 ingredients included the blood of an impure animal. I'm not sure exactly which animal it was. But the idea was that the incense was meant to turn over even those things which are completely and absolutely negative and assist to bring them to godliness. And so that's the reason why that was in particular a very, very, very important part of the service of the Beit HaMikdash. So this service revealed the light of God in the world. Of course, you have two different ways of serving God. You have one way through the positive mitzvot, and when you put on tefillin, when you bring in Shabbat by lighting Shabbat candles, when you make Kiddush, or whatever you do, you are activating your love for God. You're fulfilling what God wants in a positive way, in a proactive way. And then you have the 365 mitzvot, which are, I had a friend who used to say he hated the term negative commandments. He says that commandments are not negative. They're just commanding you not to do something. So the mitzvot, but we refer to them as the negative mitzvot because they refer to the thou shall nots. And those, of course, are still applicable today. There's only 87 mitzvot, proactive mitzvot, that are still applicable today, because most of the proactive mitzvot are specifically relevant only in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, only when the Jewish people are in the land of Israel. But there's 365 mitzvot. All the negative ones are all still applicable today. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to follow you on the writing, but I can't find the page. Can you tell me what's the page you're on? On the bottom, number pages.
I don't have the pages. I just have a
2.5 or 2.6. I don't know where you are. Or 3.6.5. I mean,
I'm looking at the website, so I don't have numbers. But the chapter is chapter 3.
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3.
I have chapter 2. I don't have chapter 3. Did you send chapter 3 today?
No, it was sent out in a link.
Yeah, Ben, it's not a book. It was contained in an email from Rabbi Smith with a link to the text last week, okay?
I only have chapter 2. Okay.
But it's not a printed document. It's a link.
Yeah, okay. I don't know how to handle that.
Go
I'll
to
just
your
listen.
inbox from Rabbi Smith. It's Basi Lgani, 5710, chapter 3. It's from the Rebbe.org website.
Right, I'll try to find it next time. I'll just
Okay.
listen. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. So the Beit HaMikdash is made, or excuse me, the Mishkan in the desert is made of acacia wood. So the Rebbe continues and says the word used in the Torah for acacia is shita, atzeh shitim. Atzeh shitim. So the word shitim, the word shita, has the root which implies deviation in either direction, higher or lower from a middle path. The same root also implies foolishness, for shtut. Foolishness is a deviation from the middle path of knowledge and wisdom. There's a foolishness that stems from the unholy side of the universe. So now we're going to describe two different elements of foolishness. This one, right now, we're going to focus on what's referred to as shtut dileumat zeh, foolishness of the negative side. Because there, as we're going to explain later, that there are two ways of looking at something that is illogical. It's either illogical because it is below wisdom, or it is illogical because it is above wisdom. And above wisdom we're going to discuss later, but right now we're going to discuss the basic elements of foolishness, basically something that is stupid. So why is the word shtut, foolishness, related to the word to turn, to deviate? So he continues and says the Torah therefore uses a derivative of the same word, tisteh, when speaking of the unfaithful wife who turns aside, ki tisteh ishto. For as Rashi explains, she deviated from the paths of modesty. So when talking about a possibly adulterous woman, she behaved in a manner in which she caused her husband to doubt her faithfulness. So as a result, something happened there that she deviated from the proper path. And the same root appears again in the name of the location, Shittim, in which the Jewish people encamped on their way out of Egypt, where they sinned through idolatry and licentiousness. Their conduct there is another instance of foolishness that stems from unholiness. In other words, there's a proper way of conduct, and then there's moving away from the proper way of conduct where something is inappropriate, where something is not logical. And in this vein, our sages comment on the above-mentioned wife who turns aside. No human commits a sin unless a spirit of folly enters him. En adam over avera ella imkein nichnas bo ruach shtut. And this is very, very important because basically nowadays, of course, there are lawyers who make tremendous amount of money, claiming in court that something was temporary insanity. But Judaism basically says, the fact of the matter is that any time somebody does something inappropriate, it is temporary insanity. It's temporarily illogical. A person's done something that is not within the realms of the normal behavior. And when a person's doing something like that, it's because they haven't allowed themselves to think things through. Is this really the right way that I should be behaving? Is this really the right thing for me to do? And Judaism is so much about the mind, and I'm sure you came across this in Tanya as well, the mind directing what's going on. The mind understands what we're meant to do. And so therefore, there's the follow-through afterwards as a result of how we're supposed to behave. So why does a person do something that's not that way? Because they fooled themselves, because they allowed themselves to turn away from the middle path. And that can happen to absolutely anybody. And that it doesn't really make a difference who it is. It could be the smartest person in the world. In fact, Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of all kings, the wisest of all people, specifically, the Tanakh specifically critiques him for straying after idols, even though he himself did not, but he led his wives do their own thing, and as a result of that, it was considered as if because he was well beyond that. So the reason why the Tanakh tells us that is not just to kind of bash the monarchy or anything like that. It's to point out that even the wisest, even the smartest, can do something that is illogical. A person can always be pulled off out of the space of logic and into a space of temporary insanity, if you want to put it that way. And there's temporary insanity that can go on for an entire lifetime, of course. So this spirit of foolishness, folly, derives from klipa, from the unholy side of creation, and covers over the truth. It is advisedly called a spirit of foolishness, just as the Yetzer Hara is called Zaken, Melech Zaken Uksil, an old and foolish king, which is what Shlomo Melech himself calls the Yetzer Hara. Foolish. This unholy spirit of folly veils the revelation of divine light. It obscures the truth and vitality of godliness, for godliness is both truth and life. As in the verse, Hashem is the true God, the living God. For this reason, the evil spirit of folly is called klipa. Why the term klipa? For like a peel or shell that covers the fruit within, it obscures and conceals the revelation of divine light. For otherwise, how could a person ever sin? If a person recognizes at all times that their source is from God, and that God truly wants for the goodness of the person themselves, as we're going to discuss here, then a person always wants to be connected. But as soon as a person deviates that or forgets that momentarily, that's when we do things that are, focused on ourselves, and that's when we do things which are foolish. Indeed, and that's why the Rebbe points out, this is possible only because he lacks the sensitivity to realize that he thereby separates himself from God. It seems to him that his Jewishness remains intact. A person is willing to give themselves every excuse in the book. And with regards to their connection to God, like, okay, God loves me. And that's true, God does love me. But the more we do things, we're proactive about our relationship with God, the more the relationship with God is stronger. And the more, God forbid, we do things that are against God's will, then we, of course, weaken that relationship. That's just the dynamics of any relationship. But it's only because a person illogically assumes that I can carry on whatever it is and expect that everything will remain the same. And the Rebbe continues, if we only realize the plain truth that by sinning he becomes separate from God, then on no account will he sin. For by his very nature, a Jew neither wants to be separate from God, nor can he be separate from God. And this is a critical idea within Chabad philosophy. It's different from other philosophies because it focuses on the fact that any Jew, no matter who they are, in their deepest root, still has this relationship. No matter whatever they profess, atheism, or they profess even idolatry, or they profess anything whatsoever, and at their deepest root, they do not want to be or can be separate from God. It's only the sins that create this external disconnect. The classic stories are told of the atheist who comes to the rabbi and says to the rabbi, I don't believe in God. And the rabbi says, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. And that's not just a joke. That's very, very much a reality, because oftentimes the people who profess atheism do not have a full understanding of the way Judaism views God. They have a much more Christian understanding of God. And as a result of that, so that's basically, it's a very limited perspective. On the other end, when we're talking about the Jewish approach, which we've explained has absolutely no limits whatsoever, and uses the systems in place, the systems of nature and the systems of beyond nature, and is beyond both of them, and is within both of them, that entire perspective. And then when you go into all the details of that, it's a full system. But most people don't think about it that way. They just think about it in terms of reward and punishment, tit for tat. And they think about it in terms of a being somewhere upstairs, and those kind of very simplistic approaches, as opposed to a very more broader perspective. But a Jew neither wants to be separate from God, nor can he be separate from God. And so therefore, there's never an approach that this person is too far away for hope. One of the most incredible statements of this is, I'm forgetting his last name, one of Stalin's greatest henchmen was Yakov something or other. He was like the number 3.
Not Mengele.
He was,
No, he was John.
There was Beria. There was Beria or Molotov was number 2. He was his general, I think, and Kaganovich was the other guy. That was his Kaganovich.
Yes. So Kaganovich was a vicious, ruthless guy. He was, among other things, he was the architect of what ended up being the massive famines of the 30s, in which several million people died because of their reconstruction of food systems. He was, his brother was eventually arrested, or his brother-in-law, I don't remember if it was his brother or his brother-in-law, and his wife said to him, he said, go speak to Stalin about him. And he said, only Stalin makes a difference to me. My brother's, basically worthless. He's just a horrific, horrific, horrific person. And in the late 80s, I believe, one of the Chabadniks who went to Russia, found out that Kaganovich was still alive, an old man living in his communist apartment. And the Rebbe made the comment, Ardaf Tshuvatan. Somebody has to help him do tshuva. And the Rebbe sent somebody to go speak to him. He obviously, he died completely unrepentant. He was not there was nothing about him that was moved. But the fact that the Rebbe could even have Rahmanis, so to speak, could even reach out to a guy like that and try to elicit some kind of response, some kind of positive response, when the entire world would look at such a guy and say, no, he's way, way, way beyond the pale. It's really, really, it's beyond remarkable. And I can't really say that there's any reason, any way that could have happened besides for this one sentence right here. And the Rebbe continues and says, the proof of that statement is seen when a Jew is put to the trial of being forced to deny his faith. Forced. When you do it, by one's own choice, then they think it's their own choice. But as soon as you put a person in a place where the vast majority, and this is of course something that's historical, going all the way back, when a person's forced to deny their own faith, then when there's no room for the mistaken thought that he will not be separated thereby from God, he's willing to risk his life to undergo suffering and pain to give up his very life in the sanctification of the divine name. And when you look at, again, historically, of course, there were certainly people who did turn away from Judaism, but that's absolutely the minority. The vast, vast majority, you just look at the Inquisition itself. Hundreds of thousands of people were willing to uproot their lives, as opposed to say the simple, statement, okay, I believe in JC. And there were, of course, Marranos, but the Marranos themselves tried to keep their Judaism as much as possible. And then there were the minority of the minorities who converted to Christianity. And the vast majority of people are willing to go through tremendous, tremendous pain rather than deny God's existence or deny Judaism. So the Rebbe says this phenomenon is observable even at the lowest level of spiritual attainment, even among the most light-minded and most sinful of Jews. Like we mentioned, the story of the Jew, the capo in the Holocaust. I always forget his name, but like that story that we told, that he was willing to even though he was a terrible Jew, he was willing to, at the last moment, turn around and sanctify his name for God's for Judaism. Why? Because they know and sense that in such a case, compliance would sever them from the God of Israel, and this no Jew can tolerate. In the case of other sins, however, people lack the awareness and the sensitivity that these two separate them from God. They imagine that they're still as fully Jewish as they were before they sinned. And in terms of Jewish, we're talking about the connection to God, we're talking about the religion element. A person does not become not Jewish. But we're just talking about the idea of somebody kind of, this is, what do you mean I'm Jewish? This is the essence of who I am. Yes, the essence of who you are is untainted by anything that you do, but the relationship as it's extended into reality is of course strained by the fact that you are, or we are, distancing ourselves from God. So this delusion emanates from the spirit of folly described above that obscures the light and revelation of godliness to the point that they are not felt. And the spirit of folly deadens one's sensitivity. And so this idea of sensitivity is really critical, because that's a crucial element to how we develop our spiritual capabilities. If a person just looks at everything and just does them, checking everything off, they're losing the purpose. They're losing where Judaism is meant to bring a person. On the other hand, when a person recognizes the power of lighting Shabbos candles or something like that, and a person tries to absorb that feeling, those energies, so as a result of that, they're of course able to grow. They're able to expand their spiritual horizons. So the idea of sensitivity is absolutely crucial. So what's pulling a person away from that? The power of one's physical drives and the burning urgency of the animal soul's desires cool one's ardor and numbs one's sensitivity for spiritual things. A person can be so bound up and excited by his passions and material desires that his awareness of spiritual feelings become utterly hidden to the point of total insensitivity. He no longer feels the pleasant sweetness and the goodly value of fulfilling the mitzvahs. So here we have this case of a person who has swapped something foolish for something valuable. Money for toothpicks. Likewise, he no longer senses the lowliness of his distance from God, which has been brought on by his misdeeds, and the underlying cause of this entire process, the animal soul, which covers up and obscures the light of the godly soul. And that's what's going on. It reminds me of the classic story of the rabbi who became completely obsessed by golf, to the point where he was going out to links every single day. And one Yom Kippur, he decides he can't miss his golf game, and he goes up Shachris, and his shul is at 9 o'clock. So he gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be able to go to the links. Nobody's going to be there. It's early in the morning. And the angels, of course, are freaking out about this. The rabbi, on your holiest day, God, strike him dead. God says, no, you'll see. He winds up, and what do you know, for the first time in his golf career, he hits a hole-in-one. The angels say, a hole-in-one on such a day? God says, wait, you'll see. Goes to the second hole-in-one. Third hole, all 18 holes, hole-in-one every single time. The angels are absolutely in a fury. God, how could you possibly do this? And God turns around to the angel and says, who's he going to tell? So a person can get to a place, a rabbi or whatever, it doesn't make a difference who the person is. But a person can get to the place where they no longer sense a spiritual something because they're being pulled by something else. They're being pulled by their animal soul. Now, the fundamental nature of the godly soul. This is where we've got to stop because it's already 10:30. I will, God willing, to avoid Ben's problem from before, I will send out a new version of this. I'm going to work on it today. Going to summarize it a little bit more so that we can get a movement on into another mimer. So I will send everybody a PDF from this point on, and that way we'll be able to finish this a little bit faster and be able to move on to a Purim mimer, because I want to be able to get everybody ready for Purim, get myself more than everybody else. But so that's what we focused on today, has been really the foolishness within the world, the foolishness that covers up logic, the logic that says that I want to be connected to God, I want to expand my relationship with God, and the foolishness that's pulled away the animal soul, the immaturity, so to speak, within ourselves that draws us after things that are not godly. And so that's that element. We're going to go to the next element, which is shtut diktusha, which is the foolishness within holiness. So that's going to be, we're going to finish off this next chapter and go into the following chapter, God willing, on Friday. That's all I've got for today. Any quick questions? We're good.
Rabbi Estrin. Yes, I put in the chat for Ben the link that he can go to, which was the link that was sent to us by Rabbi Smith. And
Thank you.
Where you can find the information.
Thank you.
Great. There we go. Okay. Well, everybody have a
Bye-bye.